Okay, so part two of human growth and development. So last time we talked about Sigmund Freud and we talked about Erikson. So we are starting with Jean Piaget. 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 So Jean Piaget specialized in cognitive development in children. So Eric Erikson was cognitive development. He covered the entire lifespan. Jean Piaget specialized in cognitive development in children. He also is a epigenesis, which is the notion that successfully completing a previous stage is necessary for the stages that transpire next. Um, he had a 4-stage cognitive development theory. First is sensory motor, pre-operational, concrete, formal / early adolescence. Sensory motor is ages 0 to 2 years old. Pre-operational, 2 years old to 7 years old. Concrete, 7 years old to 11 years old. Formal / early adolescence, 12 years old and older, or 12 plus. In the sensory motor stage, 0 to 2 years old, the emphasis is on the 5 senses: coordination with motor skills and responses, sensory curiosity. So the coordination of their motor skills and responses, sensory curiosity. And then there's also object permanence, not to be confused with object loss. Object loss is under John Bowlby, the bonding and attachment. And object loss says if a bond is severed too early, then there's a likelihood that the child would grow up with abnormal behavior, which is also known as adult psychopathology. Now, going back to Jean Piaget, in his sensory motor 0 to 2, object permanence is when an object can be moved but will still exist. So a child 8 months or beyond will search for an object that is no longer in sight. I'm sorry, I think that's supposed to be a child 18 months or beyond will search for an object that is no longer in sight, such as peekaboo. So object permanence is when the object can be moved but will still exist. And they need to master object permanence within this stage. So if something is dropped on the floor, for them to still look for it because they know that it still exists. Representational thought is needed in order to master object permanence or object constancy. In this stage, you will also pay attention to reflexes. So sensory motor, 5 senses, coordination with motor skills and responses, sensory curiosity, object permanence. An object can be moved but will still exist. A child 8 months or beyond will search for an object that is no longer in sight. So, like peekaboo, you know, they see you, you close, they're going to try and open your hands because they know that you're still there. In order to master object permanence or object consistency, you need representational thought. And then also, reflexes will come in around this time. Pre-operational is 2 to 7 years old. This includes symbolic thinking. Symbolic mental processes allow language and symbolism and play to occur. The use of syntax, grammar, language development to express concepts. Imagination is strong, and this stage is also where egocentrism is emphasized. So the child cannot view the world from the vantage point of someone else. So it doesn't mean that they have a big ego. It just means that as a child, they cannot view the world from someone else's viewpoint. All they know is the viewpoint of them. Like, I want, I need, me, me, me. Centration, which is important. Centration is focusing on a key feature of a given object or situation while not noticing the rest of it. So centration, the example used was like a clown nose. If a clown is in the face of a kid that's between 2 to 7, they may focus on that red clown nose and not pay attention to the rest of the face. So pre-operational, 2 to 7, that includes symbolic thinking. The symbolic mental processes allow language and symbolism and play to occur. Use of syntax, grammar, language development to express concepts. Imagination is strong. Egocentrism, the child cannot view the world from the vantage point of someone else. Centration, focusing on a key feature of an object or situation while not noticing the rest of it. Concrete, 7 to 11, is applying logic. Conservation is the idea that an object, mass, volume, and weight can change shape but remains the same regardless of shape. Mass is first and easily learned, then weight, then volume. So my little thought process is the group SWV, from easiest to hardest. In this situation, it'll be MWV, mass, weight, volume. Concrete includes the ability to count without matching something up physically. So between 7 to 11, you should be able to count without your fingers or blocks or things like that. Attachment to concrete situations. So a child will take what you say as exactly what is said. Example, don't lay with the dogs or you'll wake up with fleas. They will take that literally. And then there's also another key term, reversibility. One can undo an action, hence an object can return to its initial shape. So, an object such as a glass of water can turn back into its initial shape if you move it from glass to glass. And that's reversibility. Key term, conservation, concrete. The idea that an object, mass, volume, and weight can change shape but remains the same regardless of shape. And the easiest to the hardest is M, mass, then weight, then volume. MWV. Formal/early adolescence, 12 years old and older. This is theoretical, hypothetical, and counterfactual thinking. Key remember is formal will equal abstract thinking and deductive reasoning. You can think of multiple hypotheses. Piaget saw moral judgment broken into two age brackets, below and above the age of 10. Those age 10 tended to judge wrongdoings by the amount of damage caused rather than the intention behind the act. Hence, even though a person in answer A had the best intentions, he broke more dishes. Therefore, is seen as more wrong. Since the person stealing only knocked over one cup, it is viewed as bad. It is not viewed as bad as breaking 5 dishes. So that's moral, kind of like how he saw Piaget felt like kids saw moral brackets, and that happened around the age of 10. The age of 10, we know, falls in the concrete stage where they're applying logic and they have an attachment to concrete situations. And remember, they will take things literally. So in that moral judgment, they kids ages 10 and below judge wrongdoing by the amount of damage caused. The intention did not matter. Children must not be caught. Children must not be taught certain concepts until reaching the appropriate cognitive development. He felt that problem-solving skills are learned. He had an ideographic approach. Ideographic approach examines individuals in depth, not groups of people. So the opposite of an ideographic is nomothetic, such as behaviorism or the DSM, where large numbers of people are studied to create general principles that apply to the population. So ideographic approach equals examines of individuals, not groups in depth. The opposite of ideographic is nomothetic, and that would be the behaviorism approach or the DSM-5. Under Piaget, he had order stages. He believed that the order of stages remained the same for any culture, although the age of the individual could vary. His findings were often derived from observing his own children, i.e., research methods were classified as informal, because when you use your own children, very informal. He also used games and interviews. So the order steps, he's basically saying, okay, you're going to hit sensory motor, pre-operational, concrete, formal. And those order stages are going to be the same no matter the culture. Now, the ages of the individual could vary a little bit, but it's not going to have any cultural representation or difference. Words associated with Piaget is the schema. Schema means cognitive thought process. So, schema is just your way of thinking, your cognitive thought process. Assimilation, the act of taking in new information. So, that's an example of that, or more in depth on assimilation, the act of taking in new information, is seeing things as similar. So, seeing a cat and believing it's a dog, the parent will correct you and advise that it is similar. The child now has to take in this new information. And that leads directly into accommodation, which is a modification of the child's cognitive structure or schema to deal with the new information. So, assimilation is taking in the new information. Accommodation is making room in your mind or your brain for the new information. And the balance between assimilation and accommodation is called equilibration. Equilibrate? No, don't say equilibrium. Equilibration. So the balance between assimilation and accommodation. Assimilation is taking in the new information. Accommodation is accommodating or making room for the information. The balance between the two is equilibration. Piaget used play therapy and art therapy. Actually, it says play therapy and art therapy are often preferable to traditional counseling and therapy because culture differences have less input on these types of intervention. So play therapy and art therapy are big with child therapy. And we know that Piaget is a cognitive development theorist for children. So play therapy and art therapy are often preferred to traditional counseling with children because that therapy has little to no cultural reference or difference on those two situations. So Piaget's concept of moral development consists of two stages, the above 10 and the below 10. So we have the heteronomous stage, ages about the prime age is 4 to 7. Is when a child views rules as absolutes that result in punishment. So that goes back to the moral stages where kids see things where based off the amount of damage done, not necessarily the attention. So if you break 5 dishes, that will be seen by a child in the heteronomous stage as worse than a child who stole one item, because there's more damage in breaking the 5 dishes. So that's the heteronomous stage. Prime age is 4 to 7. And that's when a child views rules as absolutes that result in punishment. The autonomous stage, which is like 10 and older, is characterized by the child's perception that rules are relative and can be altered or changed. So we talked about relativity in yesterday, and relativity fell under William Perry. Remember, he said first you have dualistic thinking, where you kind of see things as black or white, and then you move to relativistic thinking, where you have the ability to perceive that everything isn't right or wrong, but an answer can exist relative to a specific situation. And just to go back a little bit, William Perry, adult cognitive development, especially in college students. He had the 4 stages of intellectual or moral development: dualism, multiplicity, relativism, commitment. The ones that we focus on is dualistic, black and white thinking, or relativistic, just understanding that there's more than one view to the world. So jumping back to Piaget and his moral development, which is 2 stages: heteronomous stage, prime 4 to 7, when a child views rules as absolutes that result in punishment; autonomous stage, characterized by the child's perception that rules are relative and can be altered or changed. Piaget is a structuralist who believes stage changes are qualitative. So structuralists believe each stage is a way of making sense out of the world. So when you think about it, it makes sense, because if you have your sensory motor stage, that's with your 5 senses, motor skills. Once you have sense of what you can, of crawling, walking, eating, and then you go to the operational stage where, you kind of have this, you moved from object permanence under in representational thought to symbolic thinking. Like, okay, my imagination is forming and I can use these things that I know to create even more stories. And centration, which is just, focusing on those key things, and then you grow out of it. So he's a structuralist, which believe each stage is a way of making sense out of the world. Things to know: we have counterbalancing and an experimental process in which a researcher varies the order of conditions to eliminate irrelevant variables such as fatigue or practice effects. So counterbalancing, for example, on a test is kind of balancing think about it kind of like on a test. Like they will want to balance the questions because they don't want all the hard questions at the end of the test when a test taker is tired. But you don't want them all in the beginning of the test either. And in order to mentally deplete the test taker, you want counterbalancing. So it's just the experimental process in which a researcher varies the order of conditions so that way you can eliminate irrelevant variables such as fatigue or practice effects. Balance theory suggests that individuals avoid inconsistent or incompatible beliefs. We'll get into that a lot more, but the balance theory is basically saying that as a person would think about your actions and your belief, and you want those things to be consistent. You're going to avoid inconsistencies or things that are incompatible to your belief. I.e., people prefer consistent beliefs or cognitive consistency. So within the balance theory, people want to have cognitive consistency, not be inconsistent or have incompatible beliefs. The ABA design is experimental and research lingo. So we'll get into research later. The A equals baseline, behavior before an experimental or treatment procedure is introduced. B is the treatment. A, the behavior in question is measured to see if a change is evident after treatment. So that's what ABA stands for in research. The baseline, behavior before; B, the treatment; A, the behavior in question. Lev Vygotsky equals education. So if you don't remember anything else about Lev Vygotsky, remember education. He believed in the proximal development theory, which describes the difference between a child's performance without a teacher versus that which he/she is capable of with an instructor. That's the proximal development theory. A child's performance when a teacher is around versus when a teacher isn't around. Lev Vygotsky believed that developmental stages unfold due to educational intervention. So he disagreed with Piaget. Piaget believed that each stage is a way of making sense of the world. So you move through those 4 stages automatically. And that you shouldn't be taught certain concepts until reaching the appropriate cognitive development, whether he's saying like, hey, the more education you have, the better. So Lev Vygotsky believed that developmental stages unfold due to educational intervention, so he disagreed with Piaget. Piaget felt teachers should lecture less, as children learn best via their own actions and experimentation. So Piaget wanted kids to learn from doing on their own versus Lev saying, hey, we need to educate them. So Piaget, Maslow, and Erikson, Jean Piaget, Abraham Maslow, and Erikson Abraham Maslow is our hierarchy of needs guy. So Piaget is our developmental, cognitive developmental in children. Maslow, our hierarchy of needs. Erikson, no C. So that's Erik Erikson is our cognitive development as well. So their three Piaget, Maslow, Erikson theories are said to be epigenetic in nature. Each side emerges from the one before it. No, each stage emerges from the one before it. The process follows a given order and is systemic. So Piaget, Maslow, Erikson theories are said to be epigenetic in nature. Each stage emerges from the one before it. The process follows a given order and is systemic. Fun fact, Alfred Binet. We know Alfred Binet is going to be later on in the testing portion because Alfred Binet is the Binet intelligence test, which was then turned into the Stanford Binet intelligence test. We'll get to that later. So Alfred Binet created the first intelligence test. Here we go with these words. Epistemology is a branch of philosophy that attempts to examine how we know what we know. So epistemology is a branch of philosophy that attempts to examine how we know what we know. Piaget was a self-proclaimed genetic epistemologist. So self-proclaimed genetics epistemologist was Piaget because he felt like he was studying our genetics of what we know and how we know it. Other things to know, this is going to be way later, is a t-test. A t-test is a parametric statistical test used in formal experiments to determine whether there is a significant difference between two groups. T, and it'll be italicized, is technically utilized to ascertain if the means of a group, the means is typically the average of the groups, are significantly different from each other. So a t-test is a parametric statistical test used in formal experiments to determine whether there is a significant difference between the two groups. It ascertains or measures the average or the means of the groups, and if there is a significant difference between each group. When using t-tests, the groups must be normally distributed. So now we're going to move to Lawrence Kohlberg. So we did Sigmund Freud, Erik Erikson, Jean Piaget, and Lawrence. Now we're on Lawrence Kohlberg. This would be the last of the major theories, those 4 theories that we have to know. So Lawrence Kohlberg is leading theorist in moral development. So when we think about it, Sigmund Freud was hypersexual. Like, we want to think sex, he emphasized sex, and he emphasized sex. And then Erik Erikson came and he was like, with these adults, let's focus on the social relationships. Like, let's develop and get out of caveman thinking and develop developmental theory on psychosocial. He added that social piece, like how do people relate to one another and relate in the world. Then Piaget came as like, I think understanding the cognitive development is great, but let's keep focus on that cognitive and add children. So Freud was psychosexual. Erik Erikson was psychosocial. Jean Piaget is cognitive development in children. And then we have Lawrence Kohlberg, who's like, okay, let's add that moral development. This hasn't been explored in depth. So Lawrence Kohlberg is a leading theorist in moral development. He used stories to determine the level of moral development in children. And then we know of the Heinz dilemma. The Heinz dilemma, Kohlberg evaluated the reason for the decision rather than the action to assess the stage of moral development. So he was more so, just like in Piaget's stage with children, he had those 2 stages, was heteronomous and autonomous. Heteronomous is like there's going to be absolutes, and it's going to, like, this is what you should and shouldn't do, and it results in punishment. Versus autonomous is more so, the rules are relative and can be changed and altered. So that same thing, that same moral development applies to Kohlberg's moral development in children. The Heinz dilemma was with the man with his wife who needed to get her medicine, and the friends didn't want to help, so he was going to steal it. And then they, pretty much evaluated children. as to what should or shouldn't happen, what would be right, what would be wrong. And, you know, that's that. It's about more so about the reasoning. So epigenesis, he's also epigenesis and epigenetic. Meaning each stage emerges from the one before it. The process follows a given order and is systemic. Recently, the definition has focused on the fact that environmental factors can influence genetic expression. With Kohlberg's theory, there's 3 levels and 2 stages at each level. So the first level is pre-conventional or pre-moral. This focuses on rewards and consequences. So the consequences would be like selfish motives. Sorry. Okay, so it's 3 levels: preventional, pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional. Each level has 2 stages. So in the first level, pre-conventional, this is pre-moral thinking. There's rewards and consequences. It's emphasized by selfish motives because it's pre-moral, selfish motives. The first stage is punishment versus obedience orientation. And the second stage is hedonism. In hedonism, here the child says to himself, if I am nice, others will be nice to me, and I'll get what I want. So there's a reward for the motive, which is pretty much selfish. So punishment versus obedience is pretty much self-explanatory. And hedonism is doing good things out of selfish intention. And that's the pre-conventional, pre-moral stage. Conventional is conformity to societal standards and morals. The 2 stages is good girl, good boy, and authority to law and order. So conventional, conformity to societal standards and morals. Stage 1, good girl, good boy. The person is concerned about approval and praise and the ability to please others. Okay. Conventional is conformity to societal standards and morals. Good girl, good boy. The person is concerned with approval or praise and the ability to please others in order to achieve recognition. So, like, pre-conventional is more so selfish motives with the rewards and consequences versus, like good girl, good boy, literally is like, I'm doing something that is within societal standards and morals, like taking out the trash, mowing the lawn, helping the old lady with her groceries, and I'm doing these things not just for out of complete selfish, but there's a praise in doing them. and is I'm pleasing other people with while also getting recognition. The conformity to societal standards and morals peaks in the early teens. And then the second stage is um, authority to law and order. So conventional, you want to emphasize conformity. Post-conventional is universal standards and morals. So think human rights, social justice, dignity, things of that nature. Those stages include the societal contract, that the societal contract is what's democratically acceptable. The individual creates his or her own moral principles rather than those set by society or family. So then, in conventional, it's more so what is acceptable to the world. Moving to post conventional is what pleases me in my heart. And that'll be the societal contract. So you're still doing what's appropriate, but more so what's appropriate to you as well. And then the ultimate is selfish, conscious morale and universal ethics. Gotta remember the universal ethics. So under 40% of middle class urban males reach this level. People who have, such as Gandhi, Socrates, and Martin Luther King Jr., are examples in which the common good of society is a key issue. The self-conscious morale and universal ethics is the highest stage of moral development. Most people do not get there. And then just like the last little tag of Lawrence Kohlberg is principle thought. People do not make it to the principle thought, I think. So that's Lawrence Kohlberg. So just some final things to know. We have John B. Watson and B.F. Skinner, who are behaviorists. So John B. Watson and B.F. Skinner are behaviorists. Behaviorists emphasize the power of environment. Your behavior is based on your environment. And remember, we know that behaviorists also likes quantitative measures, things that can be recorded and written data. The principles set forth by Skinnerian are called ABA, or applied behavior analysis. And we're going to get into his conditioning later on, because we had two behavioral conditioners, I guess you can say, which is Pavlov, which is classical conditioning, and then we have Skinnerian, which is the behavioral conditioning. But on this one, we want to know that John B. Watson and B.F. Skinner are behaviorists. Behaviorist emphasizes the power of environments. Principles set forth by Skinnerians principles are called ABA, or applied behavior analysis. Now, I don't know why that makes me think of Criminal Minds, the applied behavior analysis, Criminal Minds, Shemar Moore, that show. But, they studied the behavior of criminals, ABA, applied behavior analysis. B.F. Skinner had an air crib, which was a relatively bacteria-free covered crib that Skinner relied on to help raise his daughter. He is famous for his operant conditioning model. Sorry, I said behavior conditioning model. It's the operant. So Pavlov is classical conditioning. B.F. Skinnerian is going to be operant conditioning. I don't know if the air crib would be on the test, so I wouldn't focus too much on that part. But he wanted to raise his daughter in an air crib because it was bacteria free. So Carl Jung, but it looks like a Jung, Jung. He is very important to know. Carl Jung is the father of analytic psychology. These two principles to cover is animism occurs when a child acts as if non-living objects have lifelike abilities and tendencies. Anima is meaning that the non-living object has female characteristics. Mama, female characteristics. Animus is male characteristics. So just remember, animism occurs when a child acts as if non-living objects have lifelike abilities and tendencies. And it's like non-living random stuff like a pole. And if the child thinks the pole has female characteristics, that's anima. If it has male characteristics, that's animus. Abraham Maslow, we know Maslow is our hierarchy of needs. Not to be confused with Arnold Lazarus, because that's what I was thinking last time. Arnold Lazarus is our M&M multimodal theory and systematic desensitization. And basic ed, behavior, affective responses. I think that's supposed to be effective responses because it's basic, BAS. Behavior, affective responses, sensations, imagery, cognitions, interpersonal relationships, and drugs. That's Arnold Lazarus. He's a pioneer of behavior therapy, used systematic desensitization to cope with phobias. Multimodal therapy relies on a variety of therapeutic techniques in basic ed: behavior, affective responses, sensations, imagery, cognitions, interpersonal relationships, and drugs. So back to Abraham Maslow, which is our hierarchy of needs guy. He coined the term RS, religious and spiritual, but Martin Seligman popularized this term religious and spiritual. So Abraham Maslow coined religious and spiritual. Martin Seligman popularized religious and spiritual RS. RS is the study of human strengths such as joy, wisdom, altruism, the ability to love, and happiness. It's practiced by positive psychology. Martin Seligman is also known as the helplessness syndrome pioneer. Alfred Adler, we'll learn a lot about him too, because he has his own theory, which is the Adlerian theory. He's the father of individual psychology, which stresses the inferiority complex, because he went through a lot in life with sickness and just um, random acts like car accidents that put him in a position of like being not just being able to live like a regular childhood, and having this inferiority complex. So his Alfred Adler, and his individual psychology stresses the inferiority complex. So we have Harry S. Sullivan. I call him the stacking man because he stacked the adolescence phases, I guess. So Harry S. Sullivan think adolescence. He believed that social was more important than the biological. He postulated the stages of infancy, early childhood, juvenile era, pre adolescence, early adolescence, post adolescence. That's why I call him the Harry S. Sullivan, the stacking man, because when it came to these adolescents, he stacked them. It's a lot of them. So social is more important than biological. The stages is infancy, early childhood, juvenile era, pre-adolescence, early adolescence, post-adolescence. His theory is known as the psychiatry of interpersonal relations. Our other interpersonal relations is with the eyes. He has like a bunch of eyes in his theory. Dang. Because I know I always think of Annalise Keaton. It's Robert Keegan. Robert Keegan. Yes, so Robert Keegan, he's in the other video. Robert Keegan is adult cognitive development. He emphasizes / stresses interpersonal development. His theory is billed as constructive model of development, meaning that individuals construct reality throughout the lifespan. He suggests 6 stages of lifespan development: incorporative, impulsive, imperial, interpersonal, institutional, and interindividual. He encourages meaning making, speaks of the holding environment. The client can make meaning in the face of a crisis and can find new direction. That's Robert Keegan. I always think like Annalise Keaton, her husband was the white psychologist, Robert Keegan. So going back to what I was doing, which was Harry S. Sullivan, or other interpersonal relations. His theory is known as the psychiatry of interpersonal relations. It focuses on social influences like Erikson did. Fun fact, ambidextrous is the ability to use both hands equally well to perform tasks. So ambidextrous is the ability to use both hands. Androgynous implies that humans have characteristics of both sexes. So androgynous is Grace Jones. Like, she's a woman. She was really known for being androgynous because she had male characteristics. Made a nice career off it too. So terms to know that aren't directly related to this chapter but are important is I don't know, I have time. Terms to know: periodic fugue states. Think memory loss. Periodic fugue fuzzy states, memory loss. Periodic fugue states refers to an individual who experiences memory loss and leave home, often with the intention of changing his or her job and identity. So if you see periodic fugue, think fuzzy states of your mind, like memory loss, and it will refer to an individual who experiences memory loss or amnesia, or often amnesia, and leave home, and that intention with leaving home is to change his or her job and their identity. Then we have counter conditioning. Not to be confused with counterbalancing. Counterbalancing was an experimental process in which a researcher varies the order of conditions to eliminate irrelevant variables such as fatigue or practice effects. That was counterbalancing, like counterbalancing a test. Counter conditioning is a behavioristic technique, Pavlov or Skinner, in which the goal is to weaken. That's Arnold Lazarus is a behaviorist that we know too, but the two main ones, Pavlov and and John B. Watson is also a behaviorist that we know. But the two big ones, Pavlov and Skinner. Counter conditioning is a behavioristic technique in which the goal is to weaken or eliminate a learned response by pairing it with a stronger or desirable response. So an example is systemic desensitization. Never going to get that right. That's which we know is Arnold Lazarus, Eminem, multimodal, systematic desensitization for phobias, and he's a pioneer of behavior therapy, Arnold Lazarus.